good weather on Planet Doug today, but it is earlier in the morning, around 10 a.m. The rains lately have been hitting starting at noon and sort of in the afternoon, so got lucky now. I stepped outside a bit earlier and check out those blue skies. Very cool. And I'm heading somewhere that I hope is going to be quite interesting, particularly from the point of view of a Malaysia-based YouTube vlogger. I'm a bit of a connoisseur of YouTube vlogs, you know, particularly when travel vloggers come to Malaysia. I love to see things they say, places they go, and of course they tend to go to the big, well-known attractions. They will arrive in Kuala Lumpur, and of course they will go to see the Petronas Towers. They'll go to see Batu Caves. The Eco Park I think is very popular. There are a few things that people know that they should visit in Kuala Lumpur, but I don't think I've ever seen anyone feature the Telekom Museum. And you know, to my shame, I've never visited the Telekom Museum either, but I think for much of the time that I was here in KL, it wasn't open, or maybe it wasn't as open as it is now, but I've walked by it dozens of times, and each time I've sort of looked at it and thought, museum. I love museums, telecommunication, I love technology, I love history. I mean, it's a perfect fit. You know, I should go to the Telekom Museum someday. And I've walked by it a few times, and it looked like a really happening place. I mean, not just a museum where you look at some dusty telephones, though, to be honest, I hope there are hundreds of dusty telephones to look at. But it's not, it doesn't look like just a museum, it looks like an event space. They seem to rent out the space, the grounds, you know, of this museum to other organizations. I just see all kinds of stuff happening there all the time. So today, at long last, finally the day when the Telekom's museum gets added to Planet Doug. And the great thing about it for me right now is it's right here. I'm standing right in front of it, and my hotel is right there. I just walked from my hotel in 2 minutes. So it is right here. And the building itself is quite interesting. So this is the building. As you can see, it's an older building. Maybe we can get some of the history of this building when we go inside the Telekom Museum. And it has an interesting location. There it is, right beside me. From a tourism point of view as well, because it is right beside the Eco Park. So if you wanted to visit the Eco Park, you could combine this place with the Eco Park. And I was reading up on this place a little bit, and I think there's even a cafe on the inside, and I think it has some interactive elements as well, so it could even be fun for kids. There's a hint that you're outside the Telekom Museum. You actually have a phone booth. Of course, there's no working phone in there anymore. And another phone booth here. What do you think? Is there a dial tone? I doubt it very much. Let's check. I don't hear anything. I'm gonna put some money in and just see if something happens. There's a slot for 10 cent, 20 cent, 50 cents. So I'm going to take it off the cradle. Well, I'll show you something in a minute. There's no wonder it's not working, but I'll put money in anyway just to see what happens. Oh, that slot is jammed, so I have to get a 20-cent coin. Here we go, 20 cents. It just came out the slot. Yeah, so no surprise, it's not a working phone, and it's definitely not a surprise because I noticed even the earpiece is gone. Somebody unscrewed it during the night and ran off with it. Luckily, of course, this has been replaced with this, and we don't need these booths anymore for the most part. There's the sign in the bushes out front, and there's the main sign and the entrance, Museum Telekom. And as I said, I think they host a lot of events. So I'm not here at a busy time, nothing exciting is going on, but there's Temu weekends, Saturday and Sunday, 4 till 10 and 10 till 4. So I guess they set up, maybe I should have come on the weekend, but I could always come back. But I do like to go places when they're quiet. There's the entrance. I think I read online that there's a 10 ringgit entrance fee. Look at that, other tourists in front of me. Welcome. Opening hours, Monday to Friday, 10 till 5, and then Saturday, oh, they must have made a mistake there. It says 10 p.m. to 9 p.m., but that probably is 10 a.m. till 5 till 9. And tickets, maybe? So there was a window there, and I asked about buying a ticket, and she said that you don't need a ticket, it's free. And I think the museum itself is upstairs. I'm still down on the main floor. And yeah, I guess with my impeccable timing, I came when there's really nothing going on. I guess this is sort of the event space that I was talking about. I think this all gets used on the weekends. And oh, history of the building. We'll start there. So here's another sign for Temu weekends. And they did say that there was a coffee shop, a cafe, and I'm hoping it is open, but perhaps it's down here and it's not open on weekdays. The building, yeah, look at that. There it is, the original building. The building, built in 1928 as the Central Battery Telephone Exchange, 3 stories, a model telephone exchange building at the time on account of its strategic location at the heart of Kuala Lumpur and the underground cable space and layout that is suitable for telecommunications. 1928, so it's almost 100 years. In 2028, 5 years from now, it'll have its 100-year anniversary. So in the early 1980s, plans were underway to demolish the building because Jabatan Telekomunikasi Malaysia needed to house office space and new equipment. At Tun Mahathir's suggestion, the building was re-evaluated and a conservation order was imposed to maintain its historical values and its structural adaptation of 19th century architectural elegance. Yeah, I'm all in favor of that. I mean, it would be a shame to have torn this down. By the end of 1994, the beautiful colonial-style building officially opened its doors to the public as Museum Telekom. The building, with its symmetrically aligned windows and 2-story high Ionian columns, have been proclaimed a national heritage building and a historic landmark. Yeah, I think there's a more detailed history online where you can find out they had all kinds of ideas of what to do with this building, and I think its fate was kind of up in the air for a long time, and then it finally turned into a museum. And it's the kind of museum that's almost designed for Planet Doug, because I love museums that focus on specific topics, such as communications, you know, telecom, telephones. And here's their their Instagrammable spot right here. Oh, so sad. Museum Telecom Cafe. Yeah, it's completely shut down. This is pretty funny. Oh, that is so sad. We are closed tomorrow, December 30th, 2022, and we will be opened on Tuesday, March 1st, or no, January 3rd, 2023, right? At our new place. Wishing you all a joyous new year. So it's a very old sign, but is there a new place, I wonder? It seems kind of odd that they would have this space here and do nothing with it ever since that date. So apparently the museum is up on the 2nd and 3rd floors, so you've got to go up here. Oh, okay, there, look at that. You get a much better idea of the building's design when you see it here. But I think at the time when it was built, it would have been sitting here more or less by itself, and now it's surrounded by other buildings. So maybe you just don't see it as clearly. But yeah, that's what it looks like. Yeah, beautiful building. And right out of the gate, they hit you with some telecommunications. Old style rotary phones. Yeah, as I was saying, this building would not have been here when this telecommunications building was constructed. So this whole area, you could have seen it from the back, but now it's enclosed by other buildings. Yeah, it's too bad the cafe is closed. Yeah, nice tables down there. I was looking forward to a cup of coffee. Okay. Museum gallery. Oh, bathrooms. I just finished reading over the first 3 displays here, 1, 2, and 3, and I'm really impressed. I didn't expect this. They're approaching telecommunications not from just the point of view of technology, but they're starting right at the very beginning of time, where so the nature of communication itself, that you're a human being and you want to communicate information to another human being. How has this occurred over the entire course of history? So that's what 1, 2 is mainly about, and then 3 is, the birth of telecommunications. So I love this idea. Yeah, there's something that has stuck in my head for my whole life, and I think a lot of people have had the same reaction to this. There's a movie called Black Robe, and it's a story of, I believe, a priest in North America when it was discovered by Europeans, and they're interacting with the native Indians of what is now today United States and Canada. And there's this one scene where the priest demonstrates writing. He's writing in a book, and then one of the Indians spoke to him and says, like, what are you doing? What is that? And of course they didn't have a written language at that time, so this would have been something new. And the priest demonstrated that by asking this man for some information that he doesn't know, that nobody else would know. And he told him something about his mother dying in the snow last winter. And the priest wrote that information down on the paper and then gave the paper to another European, like another priest. And that priest read the information and says, oh, your mother died in the snow last winter. And this really had an impact on me when I saw the scene, because I never thought of it that way before, that if you didn't know what writing was, that would seem like magic to you. The priest hadn't spoken to the other priest. All he did was hand him a piece of paper, and giving him that piece of paper transmitted the information to the other priest's brain. It's like, how did that happen? If you had no idea what letters were, what writing was, it would seem like magic to you. And in the scene, the native Indians in that scene concluded that the priests must be demons or devils because they're using magic, you know? So I think there's that famous quotation that any advanced enough form of technology will always be seen as magic, you know? So that idea of communication and how writing is, you think of writing as the first form of communication, but when you read this, it actually elaborates a lot on that idea. Yeah. Just to give an idea of, you know, what I was talking about, I mean, they're starting here at 30,000 BCE with cave paintings, which again is a form of communication, pictograms, and then of course, carrier pigeons. You know, I wasn't really thinking about that as being part of a telecommunications museum, but if you expand your idea to communication, well, yeah, carrier pigeons would have been one of the very earliest forms of communication. Then the first postal service back in 550 BCE. Cave drawings. Oh, I see. I didn't pick up on that. Everything on the right is world history, and then Malaysia. This side focuses on events in Malaysia. So they discovered cave drawings dating back to 500 BCE. So yeah, some of the first forms of communication. And then, of course, inscribed stones with simplified symbols and characters. So yeah, carrier pigeons, yeah. If you didn't have a smartphone, you have to send a pigeon. And then over here, the world, Malaysia, the invention of paper in China, communication using mirrors or shiny surfaces and the reflection of the sun. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You could send a simple signal that way. It makes me think of smoke signals. And then the history of Malaysia, wooden boats would transport people up and down rivers, and information would be, you know, transported that way. The arrival of Islam, elephants for travel. The messenger, just like a pigeon, you know, a carrier pigeon, you also used humans that way, right? So if you didn't have writing, you didn't have written messages, you would give your message to a person, and that person would run to the next village or wherever they need to go to, and then verbally deliver the message, you know, so that's communication as well. Quite interesting. And then 1440 CE, the printing press, Gutenberg, of course, very famous. And then town crier. That's a very cool idea, you know, the way of transmitting news, the main method of delivering news, you know, where a man walks around ringing a bell and shouting the news to everyone. And then in 1650, the first daily newspaper in Strasbourg. And flags as well, right? That's a maritime method, isn't it? Using flags on a ship, various combinations of flags, different colors, different shapes, different symbols would be used to communicate. And it says here that the first printing press arrived in Malaysia, in Malacca, in 1817. So yeah, that's kind of what I was talking about. The museum starts at this point with just the idea of communication itself. And that's kind of cool. I wasn't expecting that. I'm going to do this one screen at a time. There's too much to jam into my head all at once. But number 3 here is interesting. This is the birth of telecommunications itself. And it begins with the telegraph and then moved on to the telephone itself. And there's some really interesting facts here about Malaysia. I'd never heard of anything like this before, so it's quite interesting. So starting with the world in 1837, I guess these two guys patented the first electric telegraph. And I guess the idea of a telegraph is it just sort of sends a little burst of sound. I mean, you can't speak through a telegraph. And then, of course, Samuel Morse, he invented the Morse code, and that was a way to send, you know, coded messages just with dots and dashes. So, because this could not send, you couldn't speak through this, but you could send a noise, basically, that's all it was. But then you had to have a cable. The first ones, I believe, all had to be connected by cable. and you got your first transatlantic cable in 1858. And this is what jumped out at me, that in 1870, submarine telegraph cables linked Malaysia and Indonesia. Back in 1870. How in the world would they do that? I mean, I had no idea it started that early. And then the first inland telegraph cables in Malaysia, 1874, which is interesting. But then we jump from the telegraph to Alexander Graham Bell, of course, and he's credited with inventing the telephone, which of course can transmit a voice, a human voice. And then finally, we have the first telegraph lines between Kuala Lumpur, Malacca, and Singapore, 1886. And then you get from the wired telephone to wireless radio. Marconi invented and patented the radio. This marked the beginning of the wireless revolution. Oh, look at that, 1901, the first successful transatlantic wireless transmission. A signal sent from Cornwall to Newfoundland, that's now Canada. So there you go. From carrier pigeons to telegraph to radio to telegraph to telephone to radio. And these last two displays, they bring us up to the modern era, beginning with radio, then television, then the fax machine, then moving into like a handheld phone, satellites, and finally the internet. And it ends in 1995 with the construction of the KL Tower, which is a lot of big cities around the world have like huge towers, and they're known as tourist attractions where you go up the elevator and you get a beautiful view of the city, but their main purpose, of course, are as telecommunications towers. They build those because they put all kinds of antennas and transmitting equipment up at the top. That's what they're for. But this is it's interesting here that comparing the world to Malaysia, a lot of information on the Malaysian side. A lot of this is really interesting. At the Raffles Hotel in Singapore, first hotel to have a telephone line in every bedroom, 1917. That's interesting. And the first commercial radio broadcast in 1930 in Malaysia. And I find this kind of jumped out at me too, the Japanese occupation, where thousands of telephone poles were destroyed, to restrict your enemy's ability to communicate. And then they had to all of that be rebuilt again. But on this side, it's just talking about the invention of radio, television, a teleprinter, kind of an antecedent to the fax machine, and then computers. In 1941, I guess the very first very simple computers. One thing to note though, whenever I read about people who invent things, you do have to be careful because of course, whoever was credited with inventing it, the story is not that simple. The person who gets credited with inventing something is usually the first person who patented it and perhaps produced the first commonly usable form of that technology. But at the same time, there could be many other people who invented roughly the same thing at the same time, because they're all at the same point in the progression of technology, and lots of people are working on all these ideas and people are inventing the same thing at the same time. But in the history books, only one person gets credited with the invention, but the story is never quite that simple. So you have to keep that in mind. And here we jump into the modern era. 1957 in Russia, the first satellite launch. 1962, the first satellite transmission. 1973, the first portable handset. Dr. Martin Cooper. I hadn't heard that before. And in 1989, the modern era begins. The internet. Tim Berners-Lee invented the World Wide Web. And a lot of interesting things going on in Malaysia at that time. 1959, the first microwave network station at Bukit Nanas, and that's where we are now. Essentially, it's just behind us, the Eco Park. It's a hill, built on a hill, and that's a Bukit Nanas. The first television broadcast in black and white in 1963 in Malaysia. A submarine telephone connection. Cables were laid all across Southeast Asia. The first international Earth satellite receiving station in Malaysia was built in Kuantan, 1970. Mobile telephone introduced in 1985, and the KL Tower, built in 1995. This picture jumps out at me. The women with the switchboard, how you have to pull out a cable and then plug it into another outlet. And this was a job that my mother had. My mother immigrated from the Netherlands to Canada after World War II. And one of the first jobs she got in Canada as a young woman was working in an office like that, and she was a switchboard operator. This is an interesting summary. Here in the museum, they've developed a series of symbols to indicate the type of communication that we're talking about, which I find interesting. So this one is text editing and storage. You see footprints, it's conveyance. So, physically bringing the message from one place to another. An ear for audio signals, eye for optical signals, and then the modern era, I guess, optical and audio signals. So throughout the museum, I guess they use these on all the, the different displays. So that was the lobby for the museum, and then you move into the main museum itself. Look at that, this large room, and then just glance around the door here and you can see, look at that. This is a very special place. I thought someone was sitting over there, but no, they're models, like mannequins. Look at that. Much more elaborate museum than I expected. So, the inscribed stone of Terengganu. And this particular stone says is evidence of the existence of Islam in the 14th century. It is said to be the oldest Jawi script found in Malaysia. So here's the inscribed stone that they're talking about. This is a replica. It isn't the original. There's a little notation there that these are not originals, and the originals are kept in safekeeping somewhere else. Cave drawings, and there's some examples of simple cave drawings. And somehow you wouldn't automatically think of boats when you think of communications, but why not? Early communications, the message, the information has to be physically moved, and rivers were the main forms of transportation for a very long time in human history. These are sampan, and it says it comes from 3 planks, derived from the original Cantonese term for boats. It says here that with the arrival of Islam came the notable Quran. With it came the implementation of Arabic scripture in the Malay language known as the Jawi script. Before printing was widely adopted in the 19th century, the Quran was circulated in the form of manuscripts by copyists and calligraphers. And that's a fascinating part of history. I've seen it in a lot of movies where, of course, before the printing press, if you wanted to make a new copy of a book, any book, including the Quran, you would have to write out the entire book by hand. And of course, they would want to make it look good. So they would use, calligraphy. Very, skilled writers would. I could never do it. My handwriting is so awful. But you have to be, almost an artist in order to copy a book, all before the printing press. All of this is a very interesting idea. I'm not sure I've thought about it as clearly in quite this way before, that communication and telecommunications And communication in general involves the physical movement of something to somewhere. Whatever it is you're talking about, something has to move there. If you're speaking, the sound moves from one person to another. A handwritten message has to be physically carried somewhere. Light, of course, is movement. So if you use semaphores like a flag, you're sending a message using light. I mean, something is moving from point A to point B, whether it's through the air, light, sound, or handwritten, or even information. A human being has the information in their brain, it's stored there, and then they have to physically bring their brain to the next village and then speak the message, right? So they're physically moving the information, and then your brain is just the holding container for that information. So yeah, like here you are in a museum about communications, telecommunications, and you've got things like a boat and of course a book, but also elephants, because they're saying here that the jungle is so dense in Malaysia, the elephants are the most efficient way, and boats of course, of moving from place to place, and that is part of communication. Weaving as well, which I'd never really thought of, but yeah, you weave ideas and pictures and history and messages, into cloth, and that can be a form of communication as well. Even ceramics, because you can write on it and it can contain information. And over here they have a really nice display. It kind of matches the written display over there, but this is all done with a lot more photographs, moving from way in the past, BCE, and then moving ahead to modern times. You've got pictograms, cave paintings, carrier pigeons, postal service, smoke signals, like even on the Great Wall of China, each tower could send up a smoke signal to the next tower, and information could move very quickly along the tower. A human being, the marathon man, the runners from Greece. And then heliographs. Helio, of course, is related to sun or light. So they're using mirrors to flash signals. And then the invention of paper, the town crier, also communication, printing press, semaphore with flags, and then daily newspapers. So, yeah, very interesting. I was sort of expecting to come here and just look at a bunch of displays of old phones, and that would be the end of it. But no, this place is very thoughtful. A lot of thoughts churning away here on Planet Doug this morning, and I wasn't expecting that. All I need is that coffee, but they closed their coffee shop. Can't have everything on Planet Doug, I guess. I'm reading through this display, and I've stopped at carrier pigeons, because this is also something maybe I haven't really thought about that much. It's a fascinating idea. I wonder if there have been movies made about carrier pigeons. And this jumps out at me because, they explain how carrier pigeons work. They have a very advanced system in their brain where they can locate where their home is. So this is where they live. This is the pigeon's home. And then you can take that pigeon with you. Say you're going on a trip, you're going to travel 500 miles away. You bring the pigeon with you in a small cage, and then you just go for your journey. When you get to where your destination, you write a message, tie it to the pigeon's leg, and you let it go, and it flies home. Because that's what these pigeons do. It knows how to get back to its home, and homing devices built into their brain, and they fly all the way home. So I was just thinking, I had this funny image that now every time we go out, we always have this in our pocket, right? Because this is how we communicate with everyone. But back in those days, you could head out for the day and your mother shouts at you, "Oh, don't forget your pigeon." So, "Oh, I forgot my pigeon." And everybody leaves the house with a pigeon, pigeon in their pocket or a small cage, and they go out for the day and they want to talk to their mom, send a message home or something. And they just get out their pigeon and write a message, and it's like, "Don't forget your pigeon." I forgot my pigeon. Anyway, Planet Doug humor. And this display also conveys the idea of, the base form of communication. It can be sound. So you've got a man here with a suspended drum, what do they, oh, looks like they call it here, a katuk, traditional instrument made out of a large hollowed out bamboo or wood, used to mark prayer times, a warning against enemy attacks, and for emergencies. Yeah, so you can basically use a drum as a form of communication, which is yeah, pretty cool. And then the human being itself would be the perfect communication device. You know, the messenger, relay information verbally. Yeah, when you think about it, to be a good messenger, you'd have to be very intelligent, an exceptional memory, outstanding endurance and stamina. Yeah, not just anybody could be a messenger, right? You know, how many people have you told something to tell somebody else, and by the time they get there, they've completely forgotten what you told them? The messenger would have to remember. And of course, there's a lot of science fiction ideas and stories now where in the future, people have like memory chips embedded in their brain, you know, and you can download, you know, terabytes worth of data into the human brain using these enhancements and then deliver that information somewhere else. All right. Next room. I think by the time we go into this room, now we're going to get into the technology itself, the actual devices that we use to communicate. I think this should be fascinating. Some more history of the first inventions. Marconi with the radio, and the first message he sent in 1897 was, "Are you ready?" was the first words he spoke across his radio. And this woman was Emma Mills Nutt, the very first person hired as a telephone operator. And as I said, my mother had a job doing a similar work in Canada when she first arrived there. Alexander Graham Bell, and the first words he spoke was only went as far as the next room, from one room to the next room, and he said, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you," because he was working with Thomas Watson. They developed this technology together. Was there a recording of that? I have a vague memory of hearing some of these early communications, and of course what jumped out at me was how bad they were. I mean, it's not like the modern sound we get from a telephone, but you could still get the information across. And the Morse code developed by Samuel F.B. Morse, and his first message was, "What hath God wrought?" The first message he sent using a Morse code. But I guess his initial design was not very advanced, and then his collaborator, Alfred Vail, improved it by expanding it to include letters and special characters. And then the electromagnet arrived in the early 19th century, and that resulted in the first commercial electric telegraph in 1837. But check this out. This is amazing. I don't know a lot of the history surrounding this, but there was a large flood in Malaysia in 1926, and apparently this flood spurred communication development, because, you know, it's a big emergency and people needed to communicate, and then they realized how important it was to be able to communicate during an emergency. As it said, safety and welfare of the people became a priority during this period. But look at these photographs. Isn't that amazing? And this is the old Market Square, the Kuala Lumpur radio station. And check this one out, Pedaling Street. That's how it looked long ago. I don't know what year that photo was taken, but no, that's amazing. Looks so different today, and yet you can still see the same buildings and the same basic look, but yeah, so different. Yeah, what a fun room. You've got the guys over here doing Morse code. They're the guys that startled me when I walked into the room. I thought they were like human beings, like a security guard or something. But yeah, one of the original telegraph machines. So I guess one dash is as long as 3 dots. And check out all these phones. Never seen one like that before. Wonder where that came from. It's like something you might see on a submarine or something. Look at these payphones. Those are amazing. You could have payphones like this today and they would be considered works of art. I mean, this is very, very retro, right? It's the first word that jumps into your mind when you see it. It looks almost futuristic. It's so old, it's actually futuristic. That rounded shape. All of these other ones. Wow. Yeah, I've never seen any of these before. I've never seen this style of phone. Yeah, I guess countries all around the world would have quite distinct payphones, and that's where you get all this variation. Huh. I just did the rounds of this room. Big open space. Yeah, it's really interesting. A lot of things to check out here. So I'll take you on a quick tour of some of the more interesting things that I came across or things that jumped out at me. So of course, we have more displays of the first radio stations, telegraph, and the railroad line. This is interesting, of course, especially now. Even in my lifetime, I grew up with the telephone book. The telephone book was as familiar to me as my own hand. It was just everywhere. You're always looking up numbers in the telephone book and the yellow pages. But of course, for people today, the telephone book is a thing of the past. A modern teenager would have no idea what these things even were. And with radio, of course, it says here in the 40s, it became commercially available for many people. And of course, that led to local celebrities, including this man, P. Ramlee. It says in 1947, at the age of 18, he entered the Radio Malaya singing contest in Penang and won the coveted first place and became a star. This is interesting. The teleprinter is now the message would be received and then it would be typed out on paper, and I think there would be like punch holes like that, and then that would have to be fed into another machine perhaps to decode it. But yeah, sort of the early versions of the fax machine. A very early switchboard. That's very, very cool. But check this out as we're going by the stairway, which goes up to the second floor. Beautiful model of the KL Tower. That is so cool. We just passed by something quite interesting. It's just on the other side here. A display of all kinds of phones, home phones. Yeah, I mean, I had some of these. These look so familiar. I mean, I'm pretty sure I owned this exact phone, a red one with the dial, the number pad on there. I'm pretty sure I had a phone exactly like that. When I was growing up in my house, we had phones like this, your basic black ones. Not quite that old though, those look a little bit older, but maybe. But yeah, if I go through this display, I would have seen or used all kinds of these different phones. And this one jumped out at me. It says it is made of 1 centimeter thick solid steel. So this is used in dangerous places where might be a fire or explosion, and they would want the phone to keep operating. So it's like an indestructible phone. But what I noticed is that the phone is hanging on a hook. And then if you look on this one here, like an early phone, it also is hanging on a hook or a kind of cradle. And in English, we have the expression, my phone was ringing off the hook. It's an English idiom. And that means that your phone is ringing a lot. Lots of people are calling you and your phone is ringing and ringing and ringing all the time. And that expression comes from phones like this, where the bell itself, like when it rings, it was a physical bell with a clapper. And if your phone was ringing all the time and the bell was like vibrating, the phone itself would fall off the hook. It would be shaking so badly that the phone would fall out of the cradle or fall out of the hook. And that's where the expression, my phone was ringing off the hook, came from. Yeah, they have an expansive display here. Even here they have an actual telephone exchange, where I guess the phone lines for an entire country or an entire region would run through something like this. Thousands and thousands of tiny wires, telephone exchange. And then these are relay stations and an emergency light, a hazard light. And this one was installed at Bukit Nanas station. So again, getting back to the idea of communication, it can be as simple as turning on a bright red light, and that sends a signal, a warning, emergency signal. Yeah, there's a classic phone. If you watch movies from whatever, 20s, 30s maybe, I don't know when these were popular, but again, that phone maybe, it doesn't have a bell, so maybe it can't ring off the hook, but that's what I think of when I see that phone. Oh, they call it a candlestick phone. It's common from the late 1890s to the 1930s. It came with a ringer box fitted with or without a rotary dial. So there you go. Candlestick telephone. Oh yeah, that definitely looks like a scene from a movie, doesn't it? An old black and white movie. You see people speaking into phones like that all the time. More payphones. It says this UK-made phone was introduced in 1925 and used in Malaysia around the 1960s. It was the first public phone and would only accept coins, of course. I'm not sure what else back in those days, what else could it accept, right? Can't use your touch and go card on this, but yeah, I've never seen one of those before. But I guess that's what you would find inside a phone booth like that in Malaysia back in the 60s. Yeah, this makes a lot of sense to me. Female operators were hired, again, getting back to, this is a job that my mother had for a while. Not for very long, I don't think, but she did do this. And I think women were preferred for this work just because of their abilities with accuracy, courtesy, and speed. They were just better at this work than we gruff men. But yeah, can you imagine? Yeah, you definitely have to be accurate because you physically have to connect the lines together and you have to remember which button, which plug goes to which phone, and you got to put it into the right one. I wonder how many times you call the hotel and they just accidentally put your plug into the wrong hole and you talk to a total stranger. But yeah, very cool. So that's this floor and stairs leading up to the second floor in the KL Tower. Wow. Oh, okay. I guess it's sort of an activity space. Maybe when they have groups here, children would come here, school groups, and then they could relax here. Looks like you could, projector over there. So yeah, no more displays up here, but this would be for, I guess, school groups to come. But it does let you get very close to the top of the KL Tower. That's very cool. As I said, we tend to think of these towers as being built for tourists, just so you can go up to the revolving restaurant or something. But their main function, of course, is to be a telecommunications tower. That's what they were built for. Heading back down to the main display. To be honest, I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping, I had my fingers crossed, that the new coffee shop would be up here. But no, there's no cafe up there. But yeah, I think it would be hard to run a cafe in here because they wouldn't get enough customers. So far, I'm the only visitor here that I've seen. There was a woman up there, but she looks like she works here, is doing something on a computer. But I've had this whole place to myself the entire time. I would buy a coffee. I'd probably buy 2 coffees, but that's not enough to pay for a business to stay open all day. They need more customers than just Planet Doug, as eager as I am. Yeah, I love this place. Absolutely love it. This is like, yeah, really enjoying this visit. And that is it for my visit to the Museum Telekom. There it is across the street behind me. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. I have to say it actually exceeded my expectations. I was expecting something interesting because I really like technology and I really like museums that have a focus on something like that. A small museum, but this, yeah, exceeded my expectations. It had all the technology I thought it would have, but then it kind of expanded that more, like expanded my brain into thinking about just communication in general, not just electronic communication. It's like, yeah, I guess, I mean, that's the job of a museum, right? Expand your horizons, make you think about the world in a new way. And I found that museum did that. It's not a big museum, obviously, just 1 or 2 rooms really, but the displays were really nice. A lot of, especially someone who's lived through a few decades, you can actually look at all the different styles of telephones and you see your whole life unfolding in front of you. It's like, oh yeah, I remember telephone books. I remember the yellow pages. I remember rotary phones. I remember my first non-rotary phone with the, you know, the number pad. I thought that was so high tech back then. Yeah, just it's an interesting place. Of course, I wish the coffee shop was open, but there is a Starbucks right over there. So I may head in there and grab myself a coffee and sit and ponder this experience for a little while. So that's it. Planet Doug signing off, and I'll see you next time.